Today, we will discuss about drugs for the treatment of Parkinson's disease. This class on the drugs for the Parkinson's disease is divided into two parts. First part, I will discuss about what is Parkinson's disease, what are the clinical manifestations of Parkinson's disease, what are the causes of Parkinson's disease, what is the basic pathophysiology of Parkinson's disease, and because of that pathophysiology, what are the neurotransmitter balance or imbalance that is created. So once you have understood what neurotransmitter imbalances are created in the brain, then you can easily understand what we need to do pharmacologically to give relief to the patient as far as the sign and symptoms are concerned. It is a neurodegenerative disorder, and uh, a proper therapy for halting the progression of the disease is not yet, but we can provide some symptomatic relief through the treatment. So let us first start with what actually Parkinson's disease is. So as I have told you, it is a CNS neurodegenerative disorder, and in this there is degeneration of the dopamine producing neurons in the substantia nigra. And the important thing is that it is a progressive disease. Once it has started, it will gradually progress, and it will gradually lead to degeneration of the dopamine producing neurons in the substantia nigra, and which ultimately manifest as the motor symptoms and non-motor symptoms. We human beings were knowing about Parkinson's disease for many centuries, but formally, for the first time, it was described by the British scientist James Parkinson, and he formally described it in his publication titled as an essay on the shaking palsy. So this particular disease was named after James Parkinson. But though it was formally named after James Parkinson, but potential therapy for disease like Parkinson's have been mentioned in ancient literature of Ayurveda, and also in the Chinese text, some therapy has been mentioned. So there are four cardinal features of Parkinson's disease, or four motor manifestations: rigidity, resting tremor, bradykinesia, and loss of postural reflexes. So rigidity means the muscle will be contracted or tensed. Resting tremor means there will be tremor, and it will be most obvious when the patient is at rest, or sometime when patient is stressed, the tremor will be there. Bradykinesia means slowness in initiating the movement, and loss of postural reflexes means there will be poor balance and coordination. So as you can see in this picture, there is tremor, there is rigidity, there is also mask-like face, arms are flexed, hips and knees are also slightly flexed, and the patient will be taking short shuffling gait or short shuffling steps, and also there will be non-motor manifestations such as anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, dementia, psychosis. So Parkinson's disease is named after James Parkinson, but we were knowing about it for many centuries. Now, what is the basic pathophysiology of Parkinson's disease? If you can understand the pathophysiology, it becomes easier for you to understand the pharmacotherapy of Parkinson's disease also. As I have told you, there is neurodegeneration of the dopaminergic neurons within the nigrostriatal pathway. Actually, what happens, the neurofilaments and the protein within these pathway become abnormally phosphorylated, and they aggregate within the inclusion known as Lewy bodies, and these Lewy bodies actually leads to neurodegeneration of neurons within the nigrostriatal pathway. Now, if you understand or if you can recall the basic physiology, there are four main dopaminergic pathways. We have discussed this in antipsychotic drugs. Nigrostriatal pathway, mesolimbic pathway, mesocortical pathway, and tuberoinfundibular pathway. Among these, nigrostriatal pathway is actually involved in regulation of the movement. So if there is degeneration of the dopaminergic neurons in the nigrostriatal pathway, it will hamper the movement of the patient. Let us just recall the basic physiology of basal ganglia. Basal ganglia consist of 5 large subcortical nuclei that participate in the control of movement: caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus, subthalamic nucleus, and substantia nigra. And caudate nucleus and putamen collectively is called as stratum. Now, if you see the input and output unit of the basal ganglia, the input unit of basal ganglia is corpus stratum, and the output unit is substantia nigra, pars reticulata (SNPR), and globus pallidus medialis (GPM). Now, closely observe these basic physiological factors, because these have got implications in understanding the pathophysiology of Parkinson's disease. Now, if you see this picture, the stratum is receiving the modulatory dopaminergic projections from the substantia nigra pars compacta. Are you noticing? stratum is receiving side loop modulatory dopaminergic projections from the SNPC, that is substantia nigra pars compacta, and both D1 as well as D2 innervations are coming. D1 is excitatory and D2 is inhibitory. And also the excitatory input is coming to corpus stratum from cerebral cortex, and it involves glutaminergic neurons. Is it clear? Now, just now we have talked about the input of the corpus stratum. Now let us see the output from the corpus stratum. The output from the stratum goes to substantia nigra pars reticulata and globus pallidus medialis through both direct as well as indirect pathway. And if you can see this picture, the direct pathway from the stratum to the SNPR and GPM, it involves GABAergic neurons. And the direct pathway is modulated by the D1 receptors. Are you getting what I am actually trying to say? If you just see this picture, you can understand it. And then the indirect pathway from the stratum, it involves two other nuclei. The globus pallidus lateral, that is GPL, and subthalamic nucleus, that is STN. And the dominant indirect pathway is modulated by the D2 receptors, and it has two inhibitory GABAergic relays and excitatory glutaminergic terminal. Now this is as far as the basic physiology is concerned. So what we have seen, that dopaminergic fibers arising from the substantia nigra pars compacta, actually it tonically inhibit the corpus stratum, and also there is GABAergic fibers coming to the corpus stratum, which actually leads to reduction of the tonic influence of the substantia nigra. And there is also one thing, corpus stratum also receives fiber from the cortex and anterior thalamus, that is basically the cholinergic fibers. And these cholinergic fibers are excitatory to the corpus stratum. So if you keep aside the GABAergic fibers, which is causing reduction of the tonic influence of the dopaminergic innervation from the SNPC, what we are noticing, there is the dopaminergic fiber arising from the substantia nigra pars compacta, and also there is the cholinergic fiber from the cortex and anterior thalamus. So cholinergic fibers and the dopaminergic fibers are actually exerting the opposite effect. Now imagine a scenario wherein there is a less influence of the dopaminergic fibers, then there will be over dominance of the cholinergic fibers. Are you getting my point? See, what I have told you, as far as pathology of Parkinson's disease is concerned, there is neurodegeneration of the dopaminergic neurons of the substantia nigra, and if there is degeneration of the substantia nigra, which is actually producing dopamine, naturally there will be less amount of dopamine being produced. So if there is less amount of dopamine being produced, or the dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra that normally inhibit the GABAergic cells in the corpus stratum are lost, the balance will be lost. And also what we have noticed, corpus stratum is also receiving fibers from the cortex and anterior thalamus, that is mainly the cholinergic fibers. So at one hand what we are seeing, there is degeneration of the dopamine producing fibers or dopamine producing neurons. So there will be dominance of the cholinergic fibers or cholinergic influence. Are you getting my point? Yes or no? So neurons at the stratum which was balanced in the normal state when there was adequate amount of dopamine to counteract the cholinergic influence. Now we don't have the adequate amount of dopamine to counteract the cholinergic influence. So there will be imbalance between dopamine and acetylcholine, or we can say the imbalance between the dopaminergic fibers and the cholinergic fibers, or dopaminergic influence and the cholinergic influence. We will come into this particular point later on, but just remember that the basic pathophysiology is leading to imbalance between the cholinergic influence and the dopaminergic influence, and the balance is in the favor of cholinergic influence. Now what are the causes of Parkinsonism? Broadly we can divide Parkinsonism into two broad categories based on the causes. One is idiopathic Parkinson's disease, other is secondary Parkinson's disease. For the secondary Parkinson's disease, we know the cause. For example, it can be drug induced. Other day we were discussing about antipsychotic drug, particularly the typical antipsychotic drug, which can lead to drug induced Parkinsonism, or it can be due to the cerebrovascular attack. Some antiemetics can also produce Parkinson's like symptoms, such as metoclopramide. Idiopathic Parkinson's disease, mostly we are not aware about the exact cause, and there is lack of evidence to prove that there is some genetic factor involved in the causation of Parkinson's disease. There is a role of free radicals and neurotoxins such as MPTP. So ultimately what happens, there is gradual and progressive loss of dopaminergic neurons in the brain, but the thing is, symptom will not manifest unless the 70% neurons, 70% of these neurons, these dopamine producing neurons, are lost. What difference you are noticing between these two pictures of dopaminergic neurons of substantia nigra pars compacta in the normal individual and in the person suffering from Parkinson's disease? There is substantial loss of dopaminergic neurons of substantia nigra pars compacta. And this loss of dopaminergic neurons, as I have told you, The symptoms will start appearing if there is loss of dopaminergic neurons of more than 70%. At less than 50% loss, the patient will be asymptomatic. And once there is a loss of approximately 90% dopaminergic producing neurons in the substantia nigra, the patient will die. And we can usually correlate the loss of dopaminergic producing neurons with the bradykinesia that appears later on in the patients of Parkinson's disease. So let us again come to the point that we were discussing earlier, the neurotransmitter imbalance in Parkinson's disease. What neurotransmitter imbalance is happening in the Parkinson's disease and why? Tell. See, what we have seen, the neurons in the substantia nigra, it actually produces dopamine. So if there is degeneration of the substantia nigra, less amount of dopamine will be produced, and dopamine is actually regulating the movement or the motor activity, because we know that dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is responsible for controlling the voluntary motor movements. So with lower level of dopamine, there will be overactivity of the cholinergic fibers. So in a normal brain, there is a balance between acetylcholine and dopamine. But in Parkinson's disease, the balance has gone towards the acetylcholine, because naturally there is less dopamine. So there is deficiency of dopamine and overactivity of acetylcholine, and the whole therapy of or whole pharmacotherapy of Parkinson's disease actually revolves around this particular theory. So you have to actually block the cholinergic activity, or you have to increase the dopaminergic activity. This is as simple as that. Are you getting my point? Either you have to block the cholinergic activity, or you have to enhance the dopaminergic activity. Now, how you can block the cholinergic activity? By using the antimuscarinic drug. So, for reduction of cholinergic activity, we use centrally acting anticholinergic agents. And how you can enhance the dopaminergic activity? Either by giving levodopa. We cannot directly give dopamine, because dopamine cannot cross the blood-brain barrier by itself. We need to give its precursor, that is levodopa. So you can restore the dopamine level by supplying the levodopa, or you can use the dopaminergic agonist drug, or you can prolong the action of dopamine by inhibiting its metabolism. You can inhibit its metabolism by either by reducing its reuptake or by inhibiting its metabolizing enzyme such as MAO-B or COMT enzyme. So one category of drugs such as selegiline, it actually inhibits MAO-B. Then there is one category of drug which actually inhibit COMT. COMT inhibitors are there, like tolcapone, entacapone. Then the next category of drug through which you can enhance the dopaminergic activity are, we call it as actually dopamine releasers and inhibitors of its reuptake. It is amantadine. So two broad categories of drug, one category for decreasing the cholinergic activity and the other category for increasing the dopaminergic activity. For increasing the dopaminergic activity, we have again types of drug which directly increases the level of dopamine through either dopamine precursor such as levodopa. Levodopa is usually given combined with carbidopa, that we will understand later on. Or we can give dopamine agonistic drugs, which is further subclassified into ergot derivative and non-ergot derivative. Ergot derivatives such as bromocriptine, non-ergot derivatives such as pramipexole. Then drugs which prolong the action of dopamine through selective inhibition of its metabolism, such as MAO-B inhibitor, selegiline, or COMT inhibitors such as tolcapone, entacapone. And then dopamine releaser and reuptake inhibitors such as amantadine. So this is as simple as this. Okay, what we understood first, that there is an imbalance between the cholinergic influence and the dopaminergic influence. There is cholinergic overactivity and there is less activity of dopamine. So you need to restore that balance. So for that we need to decrease the cholinergic activity. We can decrease the cholinergic activity by increasing by using the anticholinergic drug, or we can increase the dopaminergic activity by various measures, such as by giving levodopa, which is a dopamine precursor, or by inhibiting the metabolism of dopamine, or by directly using the dopaminergic agonistic drug. So this is how we can classify the anti-Parkinsonian drugs. This picture will further classify or further clarify the classification of anti-Parkinsonian drugs. So what is the role of dopamine, or what is the role of levodopa here? Levodopa is a dopamine precursor. We cannot directly give dopamine. So we need to give levodopa, which gets converted into dopamine. Then dopamine is metabolized by three mechanisms broadly. One is through MAO-B, other is through COMT, and the third is the reuptake. So you can inhibit its metabolism by inhibiting the MAO-B enzyme. So MAO-B inhibitors are there, such as selegiline, Then COMT inhibitors are there, such as tolcapone, entacapone, or you can inhibit its reuptake. So there is one class of drug, amantadine. Amantadine actually block the reuptake, and also amantadine actually releases the dopamine. Or you can use the dopamine agonistic drug, which directly acts upon the dopamine receptors. And let us first study in detail about levodopa. So what is the purpose of giving levodopa? Just now we have discussed. Why we directly not give dopamine? Why we are giving levodopa? You have already read these things in your first year physiology classes. What is the purpose of giving levodopa? Because dopamine cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. So because it do not cross the blood-brain barrier, so there is no point in giving dopamine directly. So what we can give? We can give levodopa. Levodopa, being an amino acid, is transported into the brain by the amino acid transport system, where it is converted into dopamine by the decarboxylase enzyme. So in the brain, levodopa gets converted into dopamine through decarboxylase enzyme, and the dopamine produced within the brain is actually responsible for the therapeutic effectiveness of the levodopa. So once it is released in the brain, I am talking about dopamine, it can go through either the reuptake phenomenon, or it can get metabolized by the MAO-B, or through the COMT, catechol O methyl transferase enzyme. Are you getting my point? So levodopa crossing the brain, getting converted into dopamine through decarboxylase enzyme, and once it has been converted into dopamine, the therapeutic effectiveness appears, and then dopamine undergoes the metabolism either through the reuptake phenomenon, or through the MAO enzymes, or the MAO-B enzymes, or the COMT. Now, if we talk about the symptom relief, mind it, levodopa do not halt the progression of the disease. It will only give relief to the patient as far as bradykinesia is concerned, or rigidity is concerned, because bradykinesia and rigidity, they will respond first by giving levodopa. Reduction in tremor appears later on with the chronic therapy, with the continued therapy. So levodopa is effective in eliminating most of the symptoms of the Parkinson's disease, but it is only helpful in giving the symptomatic relief to the patient. Though it is less effective in eliminating the postural instability or the shuffling gait of the patient. because there are other neurotransmitters involved in these manifestations. Now let us understand about its pharmacokinetics. One thing we have already discussed is that levodopa is the precursor of dopamine. And it not only gets converted into dopamine in the brain or centrally, there is also peripheral conversion of levodopa into the dopamine. Because up to 98 to 90% of the levodopa is decarboxylated in the liver and gut. Only up to 1 to 2% of the levodopa crosses the blood-brain barrier, and in the brain only up to 1 to 2% of the levodopa that is being administered is converted into dopamine. So that 98 to 99% of the levodopa that is decarboxylated in the peripheral tissues, that might be responsible for the various adverse effects seen with levodopa administration. Here you can briefly understand what is the purpose of giving carbidopa with levodopa. Carbidopa is a peripheral dopa decarboxylase inhibitor. Okay, so what it will do? It will inhibit the peripheral conversion of levodopa into dopamine, so that more amount of levodopa is able to cross the blood-brain barrier. These things you already must be knowing. And remember one thing, levodopa has got a very short T-half. Its T-half is only 2 hours. So as I was telling you, the peripheral conversion of levodopa to dopamine is responsible for various adverse effects seen with levodopa, such as nausea and vomiting, which is seen in up to 80% of the patient. What actually happened, these high level of dopamine formed in the peripheral tissues, these actually stimulates the chemoreceptor trigger zone, which actually leads to nausea and vomiting. It can also lead to postural hypotension, but most of the time patients are asymptomatic, and gradually tolerance develops to this particular side effect, and it disappears after prolonged therapy. Cardiac arrhythmia can also happen because of this peripheral formation of dopamine. Now, one thing you need to understand, what happens with the prolonged therapy of levodopa. See, initially the patient will have improvement in symptoms, but on prolonged usage of levodopa, it is likely that the patient might develop motor fluctuation and dyskinesia, because as the disease progress, as I have told you, Parkinson's disease is a progressive disease. There is a gradual and progressive degeneration of the dopaminergic producing neurons in the substantia nigra. So as the disease will progress, there will be gradual degeneration of the nigrostriatal dopaminergic neurons, and there will be loss of presynaptic dopamine storage capacity. Now, there is one manifestation which is known as on-off phenomenon. Now, what is this on-off phenomenon? On-off phenomenon is like a switch, or you can understand like on is patient will be better, patient will have improved mobility, and there will be he will be symptomatically better. But as soon as the off phase starts, there will be hypomobility or akinesia. So during the on phase, patient is good or patient is better, but during the off phase, patient is not good or patient is suffering from hypomobility or akinesia. So, and as the continuation of therapy or as the duration of therapy or longer the treatment with levodopa is there will be appearance of wearing off effect. Means the duration of on phase will become shorter. Let us understand it in a better way. Or what actually happens on a long-term therapy, patient will actually fluctuate between this on and off phenomenon. During the on phase, patient will have improved mobility, whereas during the off phase, patient will have hypomobility or he or she will have no beneficial effect from the medication. So once patient takes levodopa, patient will be in the on phase or there will be improved mobility for say for example approximately 1 to 2 hours. And as the effect of medicine goes off, the off phase phenomenon starts. It means that rigidity and akinesia returns. Are you getting my point? Say for example in a room there is a switch for a bulb. When you are entering the room, you are switching on the bulb, and then after some time you are switching off the bulb. So similarly, when the patient is in on phenomenon, he will be okay, but as soon as he goes into off phenomenon, he will start suffering from rigidity, akinesia, hypomobility. So the thing is, on chronic therapy, the effect of levodopa start wearing off, and the patient will have a gradual reduction of the on phase. So how you can improve this? See, if you can increase the dose or the frequency of the levodopa administration, it can, to an extent, it can improve this particular phase, but ultimately it will lead to dyskinesia. Dyskinesia means there will be appearance of excessive and abnormal involuntary movement. See, a patient has come to your clinic, you have diagnosed it as a Parkinson's disease, you have started levodopa. Initially patient got symptomatic relief, he was happy or she was happy, you are also happy, but on chronic therapy, this wearing of phenomenon, on of phenomenon has started. So what you have done, you have increased the dose of levodopa, or you have increased the frequency of administration of levodopa. So to an extent you got the relief, but again what you have noticed that patient have got the manifestation of involuntary movement, excessive and abnormal involuntary movement, which is known as dyskinesia. So this is the problem that appears with the chronic therapy of levodopa, and the major reason is the gradual and progressive degeneration of the dopaminergic producing neurons of the substantia nigra. So as I have told you, on-off phenomenon is like a light switch. Without a warning, all of a sudden, patient will go from full control to complete reversion back to the bradykinesia, tremor, rigidity. He will be okay. He or she will be okay for a moment, for 1 or 2 hours. But all of a sudden, he will reverse back to bradykinesia, tremor, rigidity. And then it will last for 30 minutes to several hours, and then when the drug is again administered, then he or she will go into on phase, and then it will continue. This phase will continue, and this on-off phenomenon or the wearing of phase actually appears after 2 or more years of administration of levodopa. Have you understood this? So on long-term therapy, dyskinesia is a problem, which is an uncontrolled movement manifested by facial tics, grimacing, tongue thirsting, twitching, shaking, and also the behavior effect starts appearing. The patient might have trouble in thinking, the patient might go into hypomania, there will be inappropriate sexual behavior. So sometimes it is appropriate to give drug free interval to the patient. Now some drug interaction related to levodopa you need to understand. We will end this class with the purpose of combining levodopa with carbidopa. Then the rest of the things we will continue in the next class. Now, levodopa with pyridoxine. Pyridoxine, what it does, it actually diminishes the effect of levodopa due to the increased peripheral metabolism. And this pyridoxine can prevent the therapeutic effect of levodopa unless a peripheral decarboxylase inhibitor such as carbidopa is given. The other drug interaction is that patient who is on levodopa should not be given MAO inhibitors such as MAO-A inhibitors, because such combination can lead to hypertensive crisis. Now let us conclude this class with the rationale for combining carbidopa with levodopa. Now, previously what I have told you, there is peripheral conversion of levodopa into dopamine, and only up to 1 to 2% of the levodopa crosses the blood-brain barrier. you can prevent this peripheral conversion of levodopa into dopamine by inhibiting the dopa decarboxylase, which is actually responsible for the conversion of levodopa to dopamine. Another good thing about carbidopa, apart from it being an inhibitor of dopa decarboxylase, is that it is highly ionized molecule at physiological pH, so it do not crosses the blood-brain barrier. So, because it do not crosses the blood-brain barrier, it will not inhibit the formation of dopamine in the CNS. It will only inhibit the formation of dopamine in the peripheral tissues. So, the basic thing that carbidopa is doing, it is reducing the peripheral conversion of levodopa to dopamine, so that more amount of levodopa can cross the blood-brain barrier, and after crossing the blood-brain barrier, it gets converted into dopamine. So, increased amount of levodopa can cross the blood-brain barrier, can reach the CNS. And also, because increased amount of levodopa can cross the blood-brain barrier, it also means that there will be less peripheral conversion of levodopa into dopamine. So we have seen that the peripheral conversion of levodopa to dopamine was actually producing the side effects such as nausea and vomiting, postural hypotension, cardiac arrhythmias. So these side effects we can easily reduce if we combine levodopa with carbidopa. So, to summarize, the benefits of combination of carbidopa with levodopa is that it increases the half-life of levodopa. The systemic side effects will be less. Why it will be less? You have understood. Pyridoxine reversal will not happen. This we have already discussed. And most importantly, the on-off phenomenon can be minimized, or we can delay the onset of the wearing of phenomenon or the on-off phenomenon. The degree of improvement is higher, and overall there will be better improvement as far as symptom control is concerned. So in nutshell, this is about what actually Parkinson's disease is, what is its pathophysiology, what are the causes of Parkinson's disease, and what are the neurotransmitter imbalances in the Parkinson's disease, how we can treat Parkinson's, or what are the approaches to the treatment of Parkinson's disease. And then we have understood the classification of Parkinson's disease drugs, and we have discussed in detail about levodopa and why we combine levodopa with carbidopa. Thank you.